I am sharing with you the anticipated trajectory of the upcoming 200 years, outlining an unavoidable future, the inevitable arrival of nihilism. For quite some time, the entirety of European civilization has been accelerating toward disaster with an agonizing, ever-increasing pressure, rushing recklessly forward like a raging current, desperate to reach its conclusion, completely terrified of self-reflection. In articulating these thoughts, Friedrich Nietzsche offered the earliest comprehensive analysis of this profound ideological void as a pervasive condition afflicting Western society. He identified multiple variations of this phenomenon, such as epistemological doubt, where human knowledge is deemed impossible, moral skepticism, where ethics are entirely discarded, and cosmic pessimism, which views the universe as fundamentally apathetic toward our existence. Ultimately, the German thinker focused his primary attention on existential nihilism, a comprehensive category that absorbs all other variations by asserting that our entire existence lacks any inherent worth or ultimate purpose. Even so, he maintained that you and I are constantly engaged in the act of assigning importance to things, as a completely value-free human existence would be practically unimaginable. His primary anxiety regarding this philosophical crisis revolved around exactly what individuals choose to hold dear, firmly believing that holding on to any conviction is infinitely preferable to caring about absolutely nothing. Escaping this void, however, requires more than mere dedication to a random cause. The actual substance of your convictions is critically important. Ultimately, this destructive worldview manifests as a profound failure to discover significance in the elevated dimensions of reality, effectively draining the universe of meaning and resulting in what the philosopher described as a complete and uncompromising rejection of all desirability, value, and purpose. This pervasive dilemma is most clearly articulated in a posthumous collection of his personal notes, famously titled The Will to Power, though you must approach these unedited writings cautiously and weigh them against the texts he formally published during his lifetime. Across his extensive body of work, this philosophical emptiness takes on several distinct shapes, which we can categorize as a state of profound despair, a disorienting loss of direction, and an absolute absence of elevated ideals. The philosopher closely connected the despairing manifestation of this mindset with the teachings of Arthur Schopenhauer and the traditions of Buddhism. Followers of the Schopenhauerian perspective hold firm convictions regarding the absolute negativity of suffering, arguing that our earthly reality is overwhelmingly dominated by misery rather than joy, leaving us endlessly tossed between the agonizing extremes of active torment and hollow tedium. From this bleak viewpoint, any brief moments of relief are incredibly short-lived, leading to the grim conclusion that existence itself is inherently flawed, and that remaining unborn would have been vastly preferable. Similarly, the Buddhist framework rejects the value of material life and strives for complete emotional detachment, seeking ultimate liberation from the endless, aimless wandering of everyday existence. Whereas the German visionary firmly argued that you must maintain an unwavering loyalty to the physical earth. Meanwhile, the disorienting facet of this philosophical void is deeply intertwined with the doctrines of Christianity, though the devout believer avoids total despair by clinging to the comforting promise of celestial salvation. By establishing heaven as the ultimate pinnacle of value and the glorious gateway to divine tranquility, the Christian faith functions as a powerful remedy against the crushing hopelessness of a meaningless universe. This profound sense of cosmic disorientation is most vividly captured in his iconic tale of the frantic individual who questions what we were thinking when we severed our planet from its guiding star. The frantic character interrogates the crowd, asking where we are all heading now, wondering if we are perpetually falling away from all sources of light, spiraling backward, sideways, and forward into a boundless, chaotic void without any clear sense of upward or downward direction. He dramatically declares that the divine creator has perished by our own hands, leaving us, the ultimate assassins, desperately searching for a way to console ourselves after bleeding out the most sacred and powerful entity the world had ever known. The character agonizingly questions what waters could possibly cleanse this monumental guilt, wondering what elaborate rituals of redemption or sacred ceremonies you and I will be forced to invent just to appear worthy of such a colossal and terrifying achievement. In this context, the brilliant thinker functioned as a highly sensitive instrument, detecting the massive cultural tremors triggered by the symbolic passing of the Almighty. As the renowned scholar Walter Kaufmann astutely observed, the philosopher experienced the agonizing torment of a secularized universe so deeply that he essentially suffered the grim destiny of future generations long before his oblivious contemporaries even recognized the impending danger. This sorrowful announcement regarding the demise of the divine arose because spiritual faith had provided humanity with its core purpose for thousands of years, only to be systematically dismantled by the relentless logic of the Age of Enlightenment. Modern scientific rationality explicitly encourages you to maintain a healthy skepticism regarding any afterlife, starkly highlighting our microscopic insignificance within the broader cosmos, and proving that we are merely accidental byproducts of evolutionary forces in a continuous cycle of creation and destruction. He argued that the emergence of this existential emptiness became absolutely necessary because our traditional belief systems inevitably reached their logical, destructive conclusions, forcing us to fully experience this void before we can truly evaluate the actual worth of our previous ideals and forge desperately needed new values. When you finally realize that the universe entirely lacks the objective significance or comforting design you have always desperately wanted it to possess, you immediately plunge into a profound psychological crisis. For the devout follower, the sudden absence of a heavenly Father to offer guidance, compensate for earthly suffering, or bestow ultimate meaning reveals that their faith had inadvertently constructed the very mechanism of its own downfall. Ultimately, this collapse represents a basic, yet undeniable form of nihilism, driven by a deeply ingrained moral commitment to truthfulness that finally becomes disgusted by the pervasive deceit embedded within traditional religious interpretations of human history and the natural world. Humanity has evolved past the doctrines of Christianity, not because we drifted too far from them, but because we existed entirely too close. This theological framework mistakenly proclaimed itself as the singular, absolute truth, leading to a collapse that Friedrich Nietzsche argued would push society past mere skepticism into a pervasive suspicion of all significance. The fundamental flaw of this system lies in positioning ultimate ideals at the absolute beginning, rather than acknowledging them as the final objectives to be achieved. As Nietzsche observed, concepts like ens realissimum are presented as primary causes, rendering what should be the most substantial ideals entirely hollow and devoid of substance. Consequently, the philosopher urges you to ground your perspective in the immediate reality of this worldly existence, constructing your values upward from the tangible foundations of life. In this philosophical framework, the devout Christian emerges as a disoriented nihilist, utterly failing to engage with the profound significance embedded within our tangible reality. Instead of embracing the present, their vitality is squandered on a crumbling theological paradigm, rendering them incapable of recognizing the inherent worth of earthly existence. As Nietzsche famously articulated, the perceptible universe is the sole reality, while the concept of a transcendent realm is merely a fabricated illusion. Navigating a path out of this existential void, which paradoxically arises both from affirming a divine creator that diminishes earthly meaning and from rejecting that deity to leave an absolute vacuum of purpose, remains the philosopher's most relentless and profound challenge. Adherents of Arthur Schopenhauer, Buddhism, and Christian doctrine all operate beneath the shadow of the ascetic ideal, a concept meticulously detailed in the genealogy of morals. Historically, the ascetic figure has forsaken worldly joys to embrace an existence defined by severe self-denial, strictly adhering to principles of absolute poverty, deep humility, and uncompromising chastity. While this austere path offers a coping mechanism for profound existential fatigue and temporarily wards off the void by assigning purpose to agony, Nietzsche contended that it ultimately injects a far more toxic torment into human life. By treating the physical world as a mere stepping stone to be overcome in pursuit of an ethereal afterlife, this mindset fundamentally devalues our immediate reality. Despite its flaws, the philosopher did not entirely dismiss the ascetic impulse, acknowledging that possessing even a distorted purpose is vastly superior to existing without any direction at all. Nevertheless, he categorized it as a definitive manifestation of nihilism, functioning as a destructive will to nothingness that inherently opposes the vibrant flow of life. The supreme, unifying objective across all of his intellectual endeavors is the absolute, unapologetic affirmation of existence in its totality. Recognizing that his radical perspective was destined for a select few, he tellingly subtitled his monumental work, "Thus Spoke Zarathustra," as a book for all and none, reflecting the esoteric nature of his vision. The final iteration of this existential crisis manifests as an absolute absence of elevated aspirations, personified by the archetype of the last man, a thoroughly mediocre conformist who finds profound contentment in sheer uniformity. These individuals represent the homogenized masses, completely satiated by trivial conveniences and lacking any drive for personal distinction or greatness. Within the pages of Thus Spoke Zarathustra, this figure is introduced with a grim prophecy, warning of an era where humanity loses the capacity to generate brilliance or harbor any form of self-criticism. When confronted with profound concepts like love, creation, or the majesty of the cosmos, the last man merely blinks in vacant incomprehension, oblivious to the depths of human potential. Under the influence of this diminished humanity, the world itself shrinks, populated by an ineradicable swarm that diminishes the grandeur of everything they touch. They boldly proclaim the invention of true happiness, retreating from challenging environments to seek continuous, unchallenging warmth through superficial social connections. For this breed, labor is merely a light diversion, carefully calibrated to avoid any genuine strain or distressing difficulty. Having abandoned the intense demands of acquiring wealth, commanding others, or even submitting to authority, they settle into a state of stagnant comfort, continually repeating their hollow claims of having mastered joy. This degenerate archetype has drastically lowered the bar for fulfillment, ensuring that their pathetic criteria for success can be achieved with absolutely zero effort. Picture an individual enveloped in cozy complacency, consuming mass-produced comforts while genuinely believing that existence offers nothing more magnificent than this shallow security. While they are undeniably focused on the material world, their cultural horizon is entirely restricted to mindless amusement and the pursuit of base gratification. Despite their pervasive sense of cozy satisfaction, Nietzsche categorizes this demographic as the most insidious and degraded manifestation of the nihilistic disease imaginable. The defining tragedy of this modern figure is not rooted in profound despair or spiritual confusion, but rather in a complete inability to recognize or pursue anything of genuine, elevated worth. You can see how they remain utterly blind to the metaphorical stars, settling for a fabricated, meager happiness, while entirely lacking the drive for noble objectives. Ultimately, we observe a clear historical progression: the sorrowful withdrawal found in Schopenhauerianism and Buddhism, the disoriented misdirection of the Christian faith, and finally, the complete absence of higher ideals embodied by the modern conformist. This trajectory illustrates a continuous cultural decline, explaining the accelerating deterioration of society as it plummets toward this ultimate state of mediocrity. Earlier belief systems, despite their flaws, at least encouraged individuals to strive for a significance that transcended basic animalistic urges, establishing a twisted but genuine pursuit of meaning through ascetic life negation. While those ancient philosophies were undeniably rooted in a form of existential emptiness, they maintained a crucial recognition that humanity requires elevated aspirations. Conversely, the contemporary era strips these monumental ideals of all their worth, generating a population of diminished individuals who stand in stark opposition to the concept of the Ubermensch, the superior being who wholly embraces the entirety of existence. Ultimately, all these variations of emptiness share a fundamental disconnect from what is truly precious, ignoring the reality that authentic greatness is forged exclusively through relentless struggle, profound adversity, and hard-won triumphs. The profound hardships of human existence frequently drive individuals to seek an escape, a desire that often manifests as a rejection of life itself, or a deep apathy toward our highest virtues, including creativity, beauty, and human excellence. Friedrich Nietzsche argued that our tangible, immediate universe holds infinitely more significance than any imagined afterlife, serving as the true cradle of these elevated values, despite our collective failure to recognize this truth over the past 2,000 years. The Austrian poet Rainer Maria Rilke perfectly captured this Nietzschean sentiment in his correspondence, noting that we must learn to inhabit the void before the paradise we projected into the future can return to us. He suggested that everything intensely passionate about our present reality, which religious institutions had hoarded for the afterlife, will ultimately be restored to us, prompting the celestial host to joyously champion the terrestrial realm. It is precisely this vibrant, life-embracing paradigm that Nietzsche urges you to adopt, constantly reminding us to treasure our earthly existence. Undoubtedly, certain individuals will find this heavy philosophical burden impossible to endure, and for them, a life-denying nihilism ironically serves as a safer sanctuary for their continued comfort and survival. However, for those among you who possess the strength to undergo this profound psychological transformation, this shift represents nothing less than a form of pagan salvation. Beyond the manifestations of nihilism already explored, Nietzsche outlines two distinct formal categories within his work. The will to power, describing the concept as inherently ambiguous. He classifies active nihilism as a manifestation of heightened spiritual vigor, whereas passive nihilism signifies a deteriorating, receding spiritual force. This passive variant is closely tied to ascetic ideals and the ideological frameworks constructed upon them, encompassing traditions like Schopenhauerianism, Buddhism, and Christianity. Conversely, active nihilism involves the deliberate forging of fresh purpose after confronting the absolute annihilation of traditional values and meaning, a crisis epitomized by the cultural shockwave of the death of God. Nietzsche interprets this active destruction not as a surrender, but as a profound indicator of vitality, where the individual refuses to yield to despair like their passive counterpart. Instead, this empowered creator actively seeks to establish original values and conquer the paralyzing state of meaninglessness, emerging as an autonomous architect of their own ethical landscape. Rather than simply labeling this figure an active nihilist, Nietzsche crowns them the Ubermensch, a fearless entity who stares unflinchingly into the void, navigates the trials of nihilism, and emerges completely devoted to the affirmation of life. You might personally confront profound meaninglessness when stripped of your most cherished anchors, whether through the passing of a loved one, a sudden career loss, or a catastrophic natural disaster that obliterates your sanctuary. The true peril emerges when you become so deeply attached to these lost foundations that you remain paralyzed in a passive psychological state, ultimately concluding that existence lacks any intrinsic worth and should be terminated. Nietzsche warns that you must fiercely and aggressively battle against this paralyzing despair to overcome it, acknowledging that this monumental struggle is an exceptionally demanding task. Addressing the existential crisis that directly confronts our current era, Nietzsche tackled the dilemma that haunts modern humanity and jeopardizes our entire civilization: the collapse of the moral interpretation of the universe. Once this moral framework attempts to flee into a mythical beyond and loses its authority, it inevitably drags us toward nihilism, leaving us with the crushing sensation that everything is utterly devoid of meaning. Since the Copernican revolution, humanity has been continuously drifting away from the center toward an unknown variable, leading to a state where our supreme values strip themselves of all worth, leaving us completely lacking a destination and entirely without an answer to our fundamental question of why we exist. Today, you might find yourself in a modern landscape where historical values feel entirely bankrupt, personal ambitions fail to provide a sense of direction, and fleeting pleasures offer no genuine happiness. The core dilemma Nietzsche presents is whether we are capable of discovering fresh values within this tangible world, and if we can pinpoint a novel objective that imbues human existence with genuine purpose. In our contemporary era, this existential void has frequently been channeled into secular substitutes designed to manufacture meaning, most notably through fervent participation in massive ideological movements. When individuals lose their sense of purpose, they risk slipping into a passive nihilism that breeds docile conformism, risking a descent into the condition of the last man, or it fuels a totalitarian urge for annihilation, a destructive drive that reached its horrific zenith during the 20th century and triggered two devastating global conflicts that permanently scarred our species. Because he ruthlessly dismantled the moral frameworks humanity had guarded for thousands of years, many observers incorrectly label Nietzsche himself as a nihilist. In reality, his objective was to reveal the deceptive nature of these ideals through the practice of philosophizing with a hammer, which meant gently striking these cultural idols to hear the hollow resonance of the false deities we blindly worship. He undertook this task because he recognized nihilism as an inescapable stage of human development, famously urging that we should actively push anything that is already on the verge of collapsing. By accelerating the downfall of disintegrating traditions, he argued, we could clear the path to swiftly introduce a completely revolutionized ethical paradigm. Therefore, rather than succumbing to the void, his ultimate ambition is to conquer it entirely through a comprehensive reevaluation of all values. This unprecedented ethical framework is fundamentally anchored in life affirmation, heavily utilizing pivotal concepts such as the Ubermensch, the will to power, and the eternal recurrence. By successfully defeating nihilism, the Ubermensch serves as the ultimate antidote to this crisis, becoming the very embodiment of the meaning we must assign to our existence. Overflowing with immense vitality and robust well-being, this figure represents the definitive meaning of the earth, reinforcing Nietzsche's command that you remain fiercely loyal to the terrestrial realm, prioritize your physical vessel above all else, and dedicate yourself to maximizing your earthly potential. Only the Ubermensch possesses the immense fortitude required to embrace the eternal recurrence, the terrifying concept that you would be forced to relive the exact same existence in an infinite loop. This philosophical burden represents the most crushing weight imaginable, yet it effectively seals the abyss of meaninglessness for the Ubermensch, who stands as the supreme champion of life and deeply adores their own destiny. Nietzsche encapsulated this human greatness in his formula of Amor Fati, declaring that the ultimate triumph is desiring nothing to change, neither in the past nor in the future, for all of eternity. Ultimately, Actualizing the will to power demands absolute mastery over oneself, a continuous and demanding process of exponentially increasing your own internal sovereignty. True fulfillment stems from a continuous, lifelong expedition toward actualizing your deepest self and evolving into the person you are truly meant to be. Within this framework, true joy emerges as the profound sensation of conquering adversity and enduring hardship, a process that ultimately leads to a tremendous surge in personal strength. Consequently, the will to power alongside the eternal recurrence forge the necessary route toward the Ubermensch, representing the most joyous individual and providing the ultimate rationale for human existence. I sincerely hope that this exploration of philosophical thought has provided you with valuable insights and provoked deeper reflection. If you want to continue uncovering these profound ideas, be sure to stay engaged so you do not miss upcoming materials on this subject. Thank you for taking the time to join me on this intellectual journey today.